Today, we're going to go over the balance article for what Wargaming called in the patch notes a CV revision. But let's call it what it is, a CV rework for World of Warships Legends, and I don't think I've ever been as happy as I am to report on any balance changes for this game. Let's just get right into it. We'll go through the Ministry of Balance article, which does contain something like 34 pages, okay? The vast majority of these pages, though, are the individual details to what has happened to each and every CV in the game, so I don't intend to cover all of those in great detail. We'll go over the sort of concepts of this change instead, and the other couple of balance changes that are after all the CV stuff. So let's get into it. Welcome to the new edition of Ministry of Balance for the June 2024 update, which brings a major rework, there's the word, for aircraft carriers to improve the overall experience they offer for both players commanding and combating them. That's the real thing. I don't know how bad CVs are to play for players commanding them, but playing against them, not so fun. The primary changes center around the following principles. Number one, increase simplicity and comfort for new carrier players. Fair enough. Number two, increase activity while playing an aircraft carrier. All right. Number three, encourage carriers to move closer to battle, making them more vulnerable. That one sounds pretty good. Number four, move carriers toward a point where they can be integrated into alternative battle modes. And number five, increase the feeling of progression and difference between carriers within and between tech trees. In addition, you'll be able to try out the new changes to Midway, Hakuryu, Graf Zeppelin, and Zuiho via 14-day rentals available in the store for credits during this update. With these goals in mind, let's break down the changes. So, under the heading of mechanical changes, these changes impact all aircraft carriers in the game as they alter the foundation of their gameplay. And this first change, this is the crucial one. This is what I have been complaining about for years. And surprisingly, Wargaming appears to be introducing exactly the solution I suggested. Spotting enemy ships from the air has received a big change. Aerial spotting is now considered a new type of spotting, separate from ship spotting another ship. There is also a new ribbon to indicate this type of spotting. When your aircraft carrier spots an enemy ship, it will only be highlighted on the mini-map for the rest of your team. It will only be highlighted on the mini-map. The detected plane ribbon is only awarded if the carrier player was the first to spot the enemy ship within the past 90 seconds. However, when an aircraft from a carrier spots an enemy ship, it will be fully spotted for the aircraft carrier players, so they may perform an attack. Basically, what this is you know how when you pop radar on a radar cruiser and you can see the ship that you've radared for the first 5 seconds, but your teammates cannot. They can only see the ship on the minimap until after 5 seconds when it renders on their screen and they're able to shoot at it. This is basically that same concept, except the enemy ship will never render on their screen for them to shoot at. It will only show on the minimap. It will appear for you in your carrier so you can actually drop it and damage it, but the rest of your team will not be able to shoot directly at that ship because of your spotting, which is, I think, the best thing they could have possibly done to improve aircraft carriers. And I'll tell you exactly why. I've made this argument before, so I apologize if those of you out there who have heard it. But there was a fundamental, at least in my opinion, imbalance between carriers and surface ships because of a fundamental reason. The reason is because every surface ship in this game has to spot with its hull and then deal damage with armaments attached to its hull, torpedoes or guns. Carriers, on the other hand, get to detach their armament from their hull, and then they use the armament, not the hull, but the armament, the planes, to spot and deal damage at the same time. That, in principle, is fundamentally unbalanced, and removing the aircraft carrier's ability to spot for its teammates essentially, at least hopefully, solves that problem, which in my mind was the biggest problem with CVs and the reason I sort of hated them so much, to be honest with you, because I've had so many instances where I was playing it doesn't even have to be a destroyer, a cruiser, battleship, DD, whatever, where I'm spotted by CV planes in a spot on the map where no surface ship could possibly spot me, and then the enemy team gets to shoot at me, and the CV for spotting me really doesn't risk anything except the reload time on his planes. So this right here, I think, is the most significant of the changes they've made. I cannot believe they are actually using the idea that I thought would be best for fixing this problem, but they are. In addition, all aircraft carriers can no longer spot torpedoes, which is also excellent because it's very annoying if you're in a destroyer, say, and you're trying to, I don't know, torpedo a battleship with CV planes flying around, and then they reveal the torpedoes and the battleship just dodges them. Now, carrier aircraft and fighters can spot enemy aircraft normally. However, enemy aircraft cannot be spotted by observation seaplanes and airstrike planes. Fair enough. Now, hangar size and regeneration. Obviously, this, you could consider it a massive nerf to CV's ability to impact the battle, taking away their ability to spot ships. So it would only really make sense and be logical that they would receive some sort of pseudo buff to compensate for that. So aircraft carriers now have larger hangars and a reduced restoration time, which is based on the time it takes to restore a full squadron. Most hangars will facilitate 2 full squadron takeoffs at the start of battle. The aim of this change is to reduce the necessity of using the pre-drop tactic, i.e. using 1 or 2 attacks of a squadron to reduce losses before reaching the combat zone. This tactic is not very intuitive or fun to use for the squadrons, but you may still find this tactic effective against ships with particularly heavy AA defenses. Fair enough. Then cost and earnings. The service cost for CVs is now 0, but the earnings for aircraft carriers as a whole have been adjusted proportionally. Okay. However, due to other changes, we actually expect there to be a slight increase in earnings for carriers. I guess that's not the worst thing if they want to encourage people to play them. Certainly, I would be the type of person that would need some encouragement to actually play them. Squadron speed is a key part of the joy of flight, and it's the crucial element to the enjoyment of controlling aircraft in Legends. To improve this, CVs can now freely control their flight speed, allowing them to accelerate or decelerate to their maximum or minimum flight speed infinitely. Since this removes the necessity for the engine cooling consumable, it has been removed. In addition, most CVs have had their flight speed increased by about 10% depending on the carrier. Fair enough. Dive bombers. To reduce the hit and miss nature of dive bombs, they have been altered to carry more bombs. However, each bomb will be less effective to compensate for the higher number. Dive bombs will inflict less damage per bomb and often have reduced penetration and fire setting chances. So basically, I guess instead of improving the accuracy of dive bombs, which seems like a more simple solution to me, they're going to increase the number of bombs dropped and nerf their alpha. We'll see examples of that in the actual details of each individual carrier. Skip bombs. Skip bombs are receiving an often requested mechanical change. They must now skip at least once before they are able to detonate. This will reduce the ability for CVs with skip bombs to deal extreme damage to destroyers by dropping the bombs directly onto them, giving targeted ships more evasion opportunities against this type of bomber. Fantastic. That is great. Now the Russian CVs will not be absolute menaces. Well, they probably still will be absolute menaces to destroyers, but at least they can't drop the bombs directly on them. They've got to skip at least once, so you've got to aim them, which that's a good change, I would say. Adjustments to squadron size and HP. Most carrier squadrons have been redesigned with a more linear progression of power. There are now more planes per squadron, but with less health for each plane. This means a reduction of the total health of the squadron in most cases, with the two notable legendary tier exceptions. All right. And then this is probably the second biggest change for the CVs. The final overall change, and I would say this is almost as significant as the spotting change. The final change to aircraft carrier gameplay is an implementation of a fuel limit for aircraft squadrons. Carrier aircraft now have a limit on how far they can fly, limiting their attack range and flight time. This primarily impacts their ability to strike targets at the start of the battle and hover above targets like destroyers, and it will also encourage them to get closer to the fight in some situations. That's not a bad thing because, as far as CVs go, positioning is the name of the game for World of Warships Legends, but there aren't really many dynamic things you can do with CV positioning. It does matter, though. The closer you are to the target in your CV, the less time it takes for your plane to reach the target. So if you do want to play it optimally and be as effective as possible, you want to move the CV as close to the enemy targets as possible while also not being spotted and shot at by them. And if this change encourages more CVs to do that, rather than doing the typical tactic of reversing themselves all the way to the map border and then hugging the map border for the entirety of the match, that's probably a good thing as well. Of course, all of these changes are detailed for the individual CVs, and we can see that pretty much every single CV that exists in this game is having the changes to them detailed. If we want an example of these changes, because I know a lot of people are like, oh no, there's more dive bombs. I think some people are considering this whole change from what they saw in the patch notes to be a buff to CVs. This is not a buff. This is not a nerf either. This is a complete rework of the basic mechanics, which I think, as a whole, probably makes CVs more balanced. It remains to be seen how this will play out in the actual game, but I have never been more optimistic about balancing changes in this game. If you can't tell, I'm excited about this, and I think overall this is fantastic. But if we want some examples of what this actually means, let's take a look at the who knows? Let's take a look at the Sirab, for example. Now that has skip bombers. Let's take a look at Furious. Furious is generally considered to be a really strong tier 5 destroyer, right? Bombs per aircraft increased from 4 to 5, but maximum HP of aircraft reduced from 3K to 2.7K. Squadron HP likewise reduced from 18K to 16.2. Base speed of squadrons increased from 115 to 126 knots. Maximum flight range, 28 km. Maximum hangar aircraft increased from 12 to 18. Aircraft restoration time increased from 75 to 100 seconds. Aircraft restored increased from so they're restoring whole squadrons rather than single planes. Okay. But the dive bombers. Aiming speed increased. Aiming reticle shrinks faster, makes it easier to line them up. HP of the aircraft reduced. Base speed increased. Maximum flight range 30 km. Where does it actually give the alpha for the bombs, though? I don't see that here. Do we have it anywhere else? Arc Royal? No, I don't see the numbers for the alpha to the bombs, actually. Perhaps on, well, I mean, here's some. HE bomb damage on Shokaku. The bombs per aircraft increased from 1 to 2. Bomb damage reduced by like 50%, 10.6 to 5.5. So there's an example of it. And obviously there's way too much detail to cover every single one of these changes to every CV in detail. You'll have to look at the Ministry of Balance article if you want to know the changes to some specific CV. But overall, I am very optimistic about this update. This is possibly the best balance change they've ever made in World of Warships Legends. And I have a feeling that this plan for fixing what I would call the CV problem is probably going to be the envy of players on World of Warships PC, because I know people like Flamu have suggested minimap spotting as a solution for years, and they're not doing that on PC. But apparently they're doing that on World of Warships Legends. So that's cool. And then we do have some surface ship changes. We've got Arthas the Cold. I guess that's a commander rather than a ship. This is about the Warhammer changes. Arthas the Cold's base trait, it has been buffed. The catapult fighter duration is now reduced to a maximum of 35% instead of 65%. Then Ragnarok and Ignis Purgatio both have gotten buffs to their AP damage. It's got shorter fuse time on the Ragnarok. Ship HP increased. Detectability by sea reduced. There's some changes to these ships as well. And then Justinian Lions, his base trait has also been changed. The increased damage while repair party is active has been improved from a maximum of 5 to 8%. And then his unique skill, Celestine's Blessing, which I did a video on a long time ago, by the way, is reduced by 25 instead of 50% now. Ignis Purgatio gets, I think, not the same buffs as Ragnarok. Ragnarok gets better AP, more HP on. No, it looks like they both get just about the same sort of buffs here. So each one of them is becoming a little better. I think they are both copy pastes of the Nagato, which is not necessarily the best armored or most survivable battleship in the game. So it's probably not that bad of an idea. But the majority of these balance changes, in fact, almost all of them, apply to CVs. And I think this is great. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.